Welcome to News 24/7. Let's take a look at the report of Group 2.
Christian P.S. Vitas from BSA-2 Section 2, and I'm here to report from Group 2. And the report is about the Phosphorus and Sulphur cycle. Phosphorus, it is an essential to all elements. It is an important part of ATP molecule that stores and gives every cell its energy. It is also found in DNA and RNA, which tells the cells how to look and act. Needless to say, phosphorus is needed for everyday living organism to grow and function. It says here na ang phosphorus is an essential element to all life. Ito daw ay isang mahalagang elemento sa lahat ng buhay. Ito ay isang mahalagang bahagi ng molekula ng ATP o enzyme triphosphate na nag-iimbak at nagbibigay ng energy sa bawat cell. And it is also found in DNA o sa deoxyribonucleic acid and RNA as a ribonucleic acid na nagsasabi sa mga cell kung paano tumingin at kumilos. Needless daw o hindi kailangan sabihin na ang phosphorus ay kailangan for everyday living organism na lumago at gumana. At mayroong two main forms of phosphorus. Ito ay ang white and red phosphorus. White phosphorus is unpoisonous, waxy solid, and if contact to the skin can cause severe burns. It glows in the dark and spontaneously flammable when exposed to air. Ang white phosphorus daw ay isang nakakalason na waxy solid at ang pagdikit nito sa balat ay maaaring magdulot ng matinding paso. Ito ay kumikinang sa dilim at pusang nasusunog kapag nakalantad ito sa hangin.
Good day, I am Angel Banan, your today's reporter. Hennig Brand was a German alchemist who lived and worked in Hamburg. In 1669, Brand accidentally discovered the chemical element phosphorus while searching for the philosopher's stone, a substance which was believed to transmute base metals into gold. But through his discovery of phosphorus, it became the first known discoverer of an element. In the 1660s, German alchemist Hennig Brand thought he knew the secret to making solid gold by using P. So he set this golden ambition. He dehydrated 1,500 gallons of human urine to make it happen, though P ultimately failed to produce gold. Brand didn't have to flush all his hard work down the toilet. Hennig Brand was obsessed with discovering the philosopher's stone, which was alternatively known as the elixir of life. The philosopher's stone promised its finder eternal life and the ability to turn common metals into gold. Brand grew to believe that human urine offered a gateway to the elixir of life. This was typical alchemical thinking. The alchemist hoped to better understand eternal life through studying the properties of body fluids. Brand collected thousands of liters of urine from his neighbors. Although someone doing this today would probably be regarded as screwy, it was a common practice to collect urine in early times. It had plenty of uses, such as fertilizing crops, softening leather, and cleaning your teeth. I'm not saying he was a gold digger, but he did marry first one rich lady and then after her death, a second rich lady, and he used their money to literally try to make gold. Back then, a lot of people thought you could change worthless materials into precious metals, and Brand was convinced he could distill gold from a golden substance that he encountered every day, and that is the human urine. He used his wife's money to build a basement laboratory and employed his stepson as a lab assistant. Then he started collecting human urine. As for the conclusion, Phosphorus was all started in human urine, but kidding aside, we can see the hardship of Henning Braun in discovering phosphorus. So muli, ako si Angel Libanan, ang ulat para sa inyo.
Good day everyone, I am Salinan Ilaneta. I am reporter from Group 2 and my topic is all about how phosphorus cycle works. So one is phosphate is released by the erosion of rocks. Two is plants and fungi take up the phosphate with their roots. Third is phosphorus moves from producers to consumers via food chain. And four is phosphorus may seep into groundwater from soil over time forming into rock. And last is when these rocks erode, the cycling begins again. So, phosphorus can be found on the earth in water, soil, and sediment. In the atmosphere, phosphorus can mainly be found as a very small dust particles. Phosphorus moves slowly from deposit on land and in the sediments to living organisms, and that much better more slowly back into the soil. And what is the definition of phosphorus cycle? The transport of phosphorus through the lithosphere, hydrosphere, and biosphere is a part of phosphorus cycle, which is a biogeochemical process. And this is the phosphorus cycle works step by step. First is weathering, second absorption by plants, third absorption by animals, and lastly is return of phosphorus back to ecosystem. So, weathering. The rocks contain a lot of phosphorus. Absorption by plant. The amount of phosphorus in the soil is very small, so farmers fertilize agricultural area using phosphate. Absorption by animals. The animals absorb phosphorus from the plants or by consuming other plant-eating animals. And the return of phosphorus back to the ecosystem. Sediments and rocks have been exposed to soil and water will eventually weather, releasing phosphorus once more. This process transforms phosphorus from its biological form into its inorganic form, which is then recycled into the soil and water. And in a cycle, phosphorus moves between rocks, water, soil, and sediments, and living organisms. Phosphate ions and other minerals are released from rocks over time by weathering and precipitation. Then, the inorganic phosphate is distributed in the soil and water. Inorganic phosphate from the soil is absorbed by plant. And all the phosphorus in the soil is very distributed. Either organic or inorganic molecules may include it. Also, phosphorus-containing molecules will shift into the soil due to nutrient cycling. Agricultural use. Phosphorus is generally added to the soil through the use of chemical fertilizers and organic sources, including livestock. And phosphorus have three categories such as soluble phosphorus, labile phosphorus, and stable phosphorus. The first is soluble phosphorus. It's a very small part of the total soil phosphorus, but it is the fraction taken up by plants. Second is labile phosphorus. It's more plentiful than soluble phosphorus, but it is still only a small fraction of total soil phosphorus. And last is stable phosphorus. It is the form unstable to plants and contains the largest fraction of total soil phosphorus. So, the overall health of the plants may suffer too much phosphorus in the soil. Having too much phosphorus in the soil can make zinc and iron deficient since the plants cannot use them right away.
Phosphorus cycle have important role in plants and animals. Phosphorus cycle have 4 steps. Step 1. Weathering. Weathering breaks down the phosphorus in rocks and traveling with the soil into the water source. Step 2. Absorption. Microorganisms are able to absorb phosphorus and the growth some of it also make it waste to the ocean and fresh waters. And animals are able to drink this water and absorb the phosphorus. Plants absorb water along with the phosphorus, and then animals eat plants. And the phosphorus moves into animals. Step 3. Returning to the environment by decomposition. Animal excrete waste and decomposers that are able the phosphorus in the waste materials. When the plants and animals die, the bacteria convert the organic phosphorus into organic phosphorus. Mineralization. And then 4. Sediment to rock. Some of the phosphorus gets buried in sediment, which over time becomes rocks, and the cycle continues. Some of the phosphorus in the soil get washed to the ocean, where similar process takes place. Plants and animals in the ocean absorb phosphorus, die and decompose, and some of the phosphorus ends up as sediment in rocks. Humans have had a significant impact on the phosphorus cycle. Fertilizer containing phosphorus is added to the soils. This helps the plant growth. However, when the levels of phosphorus is high, the overabundance of plants' nutrients serves and drives excessive growth of algae. When this algae dies, they can be toxic to the plant and animals in ecosystem. Ang phosphorus cycle po ay para siyang paulit-ulit na nangyayari. Dahil kapag sa isang bato, then pagka nadurog yung bato tapos mapupunta sa soil tsaka sa ocean, doon na mangyayari yung phosphorus cycle. Then yung phosphorus makukuha siya ng plants and animals. Sa pamamagitan ng pagkadurog ng mga phosphorus cycle. Tapos pagka yung mga plants kakainin naman siya ng hayop. Then yung mga hayop naman pagka sa kunyari, dumumi. Ganun, makukuha siya ng plants and ma-absorb yung mga phosphorus. Tapos sa mga katulong din naman to sa human, sa mga tao, sa pamamagitan ng paggamit ng fertilizer. Pagka nga daw masyadong mataas yung ng fertilizer, magiging siya, algae o kaya mga lumot, mga ganun. Yun ang mangyayari, kaya kaya kailangan sakto lang yung paggano ng phosphorus para hindi masyadong makapekto sa sa hayop tsaka sa mga halaman, tsaka sa ecosystem na rin.
Hi, I'm Lester Obat and I will give you more facts about phosphorus cycle. Did you know that the phosphorus cycle is very slow, that it can be tracked for million of years? This is because this process can take thousands, even a million of years. And once phosphorus finally enters the ocean or the soil, where organisms might make use of it, large fractions react into inaccessible chemical forms. Phosphorus cycles through animals and plants is much faster than it does through rocks and sediments. When animals and plants die, phosphate will return to the soils or oceans again during decay. After that, phosphorus will end up in sediments or rock formations again, remaining there for millions of years. The phosphorus cycle does not have gas phase and does not enter the atmosphere. This is because the phosphorus is usually liquid at normal temperatures and pressures. It is mainly cycling through water, soil, and sediments. In the atmosphere, phosphorus can mainly be found as very small dust particles. The main stores of phosphorus in the biosphere are in the Earth's crust. This is because most of Earth's phosphorus is stored as phosphate in rock and in soil. Especially, the form of rock that phosphorus can be found in sedimentary rocks is on oceans and Earth. Bacteria is not a major player in phosphorus cycle, but it helps in the cycling of phosphorus by chemical fixing or releasing in environment. Bacteria convert plant available phosphate into organic forms that are then not available to plants. Although other bacteria make phosphate available by mineralization, the contribution of this is very small. Phosphorus washes from land into streams, then ocean. This is because within the soil, organic forms of phosphate can be made available to plants by bacteria that break down organic matter to inorganic forms of phosphorus. This process is known mineralization. Phosphorus in soil can end up in waterways and eventually oceans. Once there, it can be incorporated into sediments over time. Phosphorus can be deposited as sediments and remains for millions of years. Much of the phosphorus on Earth is tied up in rocks and sediments deposits, from which it's released by weathering, leaching, and mining. Some of it passes through freshwater and terrestrial ecosystem via plants, grazers, predators, and parasites, to be returned to those ecosystems by death and decay. Phosphorus is often the limiting factors for plant growth on land. This is because the qualities of phosphorus in soil are generally small. That is why humans often apply phosphate fertilizer on farmland. Phosphate are also limiting factors for plant growth in marine ecosystems because they are not very water soluble. Phosphorus limits growth in lakes and streams. This is because phosphate salts are only slightly soluble in water. Generally, phosphorus is limiting nutrient in freshwater aquatic system. That is, if all phosphorus is used, plant growth will cease no matter how much nitrogen is available. Phosphorus functions as the growth limiting factors because it is usually present in very low concentration. Once again, this is Lester Obat reporting.
Sulphur cycle. It is the collection of process by which sulfur moves to and from minerals, including waterways and living systems. Such as biogeochemical cycles are important in geology because they affect many minerals. So, mahalaga nga daw po ang biogeochemical sa geology dahil mayroong mga ilang nakaka-apekto sa mineral. So, biogeochemical cycle or substance turnover or cycling of substances is a pathway by which a chemical element or molecule moves through both biosphere and abiotic or lithosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere compartments of Earth. Ang sulfur cycle ay mayroong 4 na packs. Una ay ang sulfur is an essential component of proteins. Pangalawa po ay an average cell may have approximately 1% as by dry weight. Pangatlo, the largest physical reservoir is the earth crust, where sulfur is found in gypsum. At ang last po ay the largest biogeochemical useful sulfur is found in the ocean at sulfate onions. There are also a variety of natural sources that emit sulfur directly into the atmosphere, including volcanic eruption, the breakdown of organic matter in swamps and tidal floods, and the evaporation of water. The sulfate is taken up by plants and microorganisms and is converted into organic forms. Animals then consume these organic forms through foods they eat, thereby moving the sulfur through the food chain. Its organism then decompose. Some of the sulfur is again released as sulfate, and some enters the tissues of microorganisms. The sulfur cycle contains both atmospheric and terrestrial processes. Within the terrestrial portion, the cycle begins with the weathering of rocks, releasing the stored sulfur. The sulfur then comes into contact with air, where is converted into sulfate. I'm introducing Miss Ana Marie Paulino to continue the report.
Thank you, Mr. Jomar Padrigo, for introducing me. I will explain 4 facts about sulfur cycles.
Sulfur cycles is essential components of proteins, primarily to amino acid, cytidines, and methionine. Therefore, it's essential for life. An average cells may have approximately 1% by dry weight. 3. The largest physical reservoir is the earth crust, where it is found in gypsum and pyrite. 4. The largest reservoirs of biologically useful sulfur is found in the ocean, as a sulfate onions, 26 gallons dissolved hydrogen sulfate gas and element sulfur. Tunay na napakalaki ng ginagampan ng bahagi sa ating pang-araw-araw na pamumuhay ng sulfur. Tulad na lamang sa ating mga halaman at maging sa ating mga kahayupan. Because sulfur is essential to all living things, it is taken up as sulfate from the soil or seawater by plants and algae. It is used to make 2 of the essential amino acids needed to make protein. It is also needed in some coenzymes. Important of sulfur is the greatest commercial use of element production of sulfuric acid, sulfate, and phosphate fertilizer, and other chemical processes. Sulfur is used in matches, insecticide, and fungicide. What are the common use of sulfur? It is used for making car batteries, fertilizer, oil refining, water processing, and mineral extraction. Other applications for sulfur based chemical include rubber, vulcanization, bleaching, and product making, saka cement, detergent, and pesticide, and some gunpowder. Sulfur, after calcium and phosphorus, is the most abundant mineral element found in our body. It is available to us in our diets derived almost exclusively from protein. And yet, only 2 the 20 amino acids normally present in protein. 20 sulfurs, ngunit maaari nga ba natin kainin ng sulfur? Sulfur is low in toxicity. People, however, ingesting too much sulfur may cause a burning sensation or diarrhea. Breathing in sulfur dust can irritate the airways or cause pulsing. It can also be irritating to the skin and eyes. Ngunit sa kabilang banda, mayroon din itong magandang dulot para sa ating buhok. At hindi lamang yan, marami pang iba. Ngunit, ano nga ba ang dulot nito sa ating buhok? Sulfur is a key component of keratin, so it helps to keep the hair strong and reduce the potential for breakage and brightness. Narito na mga balitang dapat abangan sa pangkat 2. Ako nga pala si Ana Marie Paulino, ang inyong taga-ulat. Ngayong araw narito ako sa isang tindahan upang alamin ang isa sa mga produkto ng sulfur. Ito ay kilala bilang tawag na sulfur soap. For the direction of soap. For better result, bath with warm water, then soak thoroughly. Allow soap to stay in 2 to 3 minutes before rinsing off. Pat dry with a towel. Do not whip off. For indication, for pimples and other skin infections. Helps prevent scabies. It is used regularly, aids in the healing of cuts and sore. Relieve itchiness skin. Also treats dandruff caused by fungi. So sobrang laki nung sabon, maaari nyo siyang hatiin sa 3. Isa lamang to sa mga pangunahing produkto ng sulfur kung saan makikita talaga natin kung ano ang mga mabuting dulot sa atin itong sulfur. For the next topic, I will introduce you Mr. Kelly Porsancula, and he discuss about sulfur cycles.
What are the steps to the sulfur cycle? The sulfur cycle is made up of 4 steps: mineralization, oxidation, reduction, and incorporation. Sulfur is one of the main constituents of many proteins, vitamins, and hormones. Sulfur is important for the functioning of proteins and enzymes in plants, and in animals that depend upon plants for sulfur when it is dissolved in water. Animals consume these plants so that they take up enough sulfur to maintain their health. There are also a variety of natural sources that emit sulfur directly into the atmosphere, including volcanic eruptions, the breakdown of organic matter in swamps and tidal floods, and the evaporation of water. The sulfate is taken up by plants and microorganisms, and it is converted into organic forms. Animals then consume these organic forms through foods they eat, thereby moving the sulfur through the food chain. As organisms die and decompose, some of the sulfur is again released as a sulfate and some enters the tissue of microorganisms. The sulfur cycle describes the movement of sulfur through the geosphere and biosphere. Sulfur is released from rocks through weathering and assimilated by microbes and plants. It is then passed up the food chain and assimilated by plants and animals, and released when they decompose.
All living things require sulfur in order to make protein. Let's take a look at how sulfur cycles itself around the Earth. First, sulfur reserves are found in the lithosphere, and are released by weathering. In addition, hydrogen sulfide and sulfur dioxide gas is released into the atmosphere by volcanic eruptions, hot springs, and the decay of biological material in swamps and bogs. Marine algae produce dimethyl sulfide that enters the atmosphere as tiny droplets. Sulfur dioxide gas also forms when dimethyl sulfide reacts with oxygen gas. The burning of fossil fuels also releases sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. Sulfur dioxide reacts with oxygen in the atmosphere and creates sulfur trioxide. The sulfur trioxide reacts with water in the atmosphere to produce sulfuric acid. Sulfur trioxide also reacts with the ammonia in the atmosphere to produce sulfate salts. The sulfuric acid and sulfate salts fall to the earth by precipitation like rainfall. The soil absorbs this sulfate salts. Plants then absorb the sulfur by absorbing the sulfate salts from the soil. Animals in turn get sulfur by eating the plants, and the animals release sulfur when they decay. As animals decay, they release sulfate salts and hydrogen sulfide. Anaerobic bacteria breaks down the hydrogen sulfide into sulfur gas, and the aerobic bacteria converts the sulfur into sulfate salts, which again the plants absorb. And then, like any other cycle, it just keeps going around and around. So there's the sulfur cycle.
Sulfur cycle, circulation of sulfur in various forms through nature. Sulfur occurs in all living matter as a component of certain amino acids. It is abundant in the soil and proteins, and through a series of microbial transformations, end up as sulfates usable by plants. Sulfur-containing proteins are degraded into their constituent amino acids by the action of a variety of soil organisms. The sulfur of the amino acids is converted into hydrogen sulfide, which is H2S. Another series of soil microbes, in the presence of oxygen, H2S is converted to sulfur and then to sulfate by sulfur bacteria. Eventually, the sulfate becomes H2S. Hydrogen sulfide rapidly oxidizes the gases that dissolve in water to form sulfurous and sulfuric acids. These compounds contribute in large part to the acid rain that kills sensitive aquatic organisms and damage marble monuments and stone buildings. Major sulfur-producing sources include sedimentary rocks, which release hydrogen sulfide gas, and human resources such as smelter, fossil fuels combustion, both of which release sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. So for the next topic, let me introduce Mr. Coracho, and he will discuss about sulfur cycle.
Hi, my name is Joseph Coracho, and ito po yung report ko. Sulfur cycle. When it comes, what is a sulfur cycle? For me, the sulfur cycle is the collection of the processes by which the sulfur moves between the rocks. Pag sinabi pong sulfur cycle, nagko-collect po siya when it comes to sulfur moves between the rocks, waterways, and the living system. Sulfur cycle is a sun biochemical cycle are important in the geology because that they affect many minerals. Kapag sinabing sulfur cycle po, it is nag-interact po siya between the geological and affect many minerals. Sulfur cycle is important for me for the function. Sulfur cycle is a for function of the protein and the enzyme in the plant. Importante po siya kasi mas na-maintain po siya ng protein between the enzyme in the plants and animals. The animals will depend upon plants for sulfur. Yun po. And isa po sa pinaka-important nila is pangalagaan yung pinakang, for example is plant. Halimbawa po, ang halaman is mas kailangan po ng protein, di ba po, lalo na mga hayop. Important, the plant absorbs sulfur when it's come to dissolve in the water. Nag-absorb po ang sulfur from the plants between the water, and the animal consume these plants so that they take up enough sulfur to maintain the health. Ayun po, pag sinabing sulfur cycle, hindi lang po siya about the halaman, nagme-maintain din po siya ng health ng halaman, and I think that isa po siyang malaking importante para sa sulfur cycle. Ayun po, as a animal consume plant, the sulfur is the move through the chain and the release when the organism are decomposed. Ano po pag sinabing consume, nag-consume siya.